Hello, good afternoon. You're all very welcome to the Irish Animation Awards panel. My name is Ronan McCabe. I'm the CEO of Animation Ireland. We have a really big day ahead of us today, and we've got this panel, which we're going to do now, the future of Irish feature films. We've got two panels today. We've got the second one then, pushing the boundaries of animation at 4:30, and that's going to be with Leanne Preston. And then we have the main event. We have the award show at 7 o'clock tonight, presented by Baz Ashmawy. Really looking forward to that. I'm actually on site today. There's a great buzz around the place. The set is up. Everything looks great. So we're absolutely delighted to be here. I'd like to thank the sponsors of the panels, Animation SkillNet and Screen Skills Ireland. And now I'm going to introduce our panelists to you today, right? So the first panelist we have is Louise Bagnall. Louise is an Irish filmmaker. Hi, Louise, and a creative director at the animation studio Cartoon Saloon in Kilkenny here in Ireland. Louise wrote and directed the Oscar-nominated short animated film Late Afternoon, and she has also directed several other shorts, including Cool on Tea, Loose Ends, and Donkey. And as well as directing, Louise has worked as a character designer on Puffin Rock and The Breadwinner, and as a storyboard artist on Wolfwalkers. In recent years, Louise has worked as an assistant director on Nora Twomey's upcoming feature film for Netflix, My Father's Dragon. And currently, Louise is developing a feature film at Cartoon Saloon. We tried to get it out of her before we went live, but she's having none of it. In her spare time, Louise is a basketball fan, so obviously a bit of a team player. And she's a keen gardener, something she really enjoyed over lockdown. I'm sure there's life imitating art or something in there, Louise, but I think I'll let the creators work on that for me, right? Next up, we have Alan Holly. Alan is a Dublin-based animation filmmaker and founder of the company And Maps and Plans, a studio specializing in 2D hand-drawn animation aimed at predominantly an older audience. Alan studied animation at IADT in Dún Laoghaire, and he's had a very varied career over the last 15 years, I think it's fair to say. As well as writing, directing, and producing, Alan has done both guest lecturing and guest speaking at various colleges and events around Europe. Alan tells me that he's a workaholic. I was chatting with him yesterday, but who wouldn't be if they could be based in Annecy, where Alan is at the moment, at a festival residency. So I think any of us would swap at the Alan. Mo Honan. Mo is the CEO. Hi, Mo. Mo is the CEO of Motion Films, which he established in 2013. And Mo works as a producer and a voice director for animation feature films and TV series. Mo has developed, co-produced, and collaborated with international partners on many animation feature films and TV series. And in 2015, Motion's award-winning first feature film, 2x2, Oops, the Ark Has Gone, was sold worldwide to over 160 territories. Nice one, Mo. In 2016, Mo won Producer of the Year, that prestigious award at the Cartoon Movie in Lyon. And most recently, Mo developed and produced 2x2 Overboard, a family entertainment 3D animated feature film, which I'm delighted to say went to #1 at the UK box office last November. Mo is currently the industry chair of Animation Ireland, a trade association representing Ireland's animation sector, and she also sits on the board of Animation Europe. Mo is a great person to have around when dealing with the unexpected, as she once performed the Heimlich maneuver on a man in her local pub when she realized he was choking on a steak. And Mo did this by channeling the scene from Mrs. Doubtfire in her head. And I'm delighted to say that the man survived both experiences. And finally, Carol Freeman. Carol graduated, hey Carol. Carol graduated from the National Film School, IADT, in 2009 with a focus on experimental animation. And in 2014, Carol founded Paper Panther, not a stop motion animation studio focused on original content and experimental techniques. Her paint on glass debut short, The Bird and the Whale, has won over 50 awards at international film festivals, including a Cannes Young Director Award in 2018. Paper Panther has many projects in development, including their first feature film, The Lost Queen, which was recently pitched a Cartoon Movie and featured on Cartoon Brew and Squiggly Animation Magazine as one to watch. Now, Carol has a serious film pedigree, I have to say. I'm delighted to be able to announce this today, as she once played Keira Knightley's body double in the film King Arthur. So I don't think anyone's going to top that today. First question to Mo Honan. Mo, just in terms of the Irish feature film, like to know where we're going, we have to know where we're starting off from. So could you give us some idea what the current state of play is for Irish feature films?
Well, I think, making feature films is massively challenging, and anybody who's involved in it will know that, because it takes such a long time to develop and get to a point where you're ready to go into production. It's a labor of love a lot of the time, but it's interesting for me to see how that part of content has developed from an Irish perspective over the last years. In particular, the very first feature film I was involved in a co-production years ago was around 2006. And it felt like a very unusual and almost isolated thing to be doing, actually, because almost everything else, with some notable exceptions, was TV and other types of content. But look, we all know that there's been huge successes for this genre out of Ireland in recent years. Breadwinner, Secret of Kells, and Wolfwalkers, now a trilogy there for Cartoon Saloon, and there's lots of others. I don't want to particularly favor anybody here in what I'm saying, but we know that it's something that more and more people are engaging in, and I think we're at a really good place now, because everything pulls everybody else's standard up, and there's plenty of room as well for different types of features. And I know from talking to people in the industry that there's a huge variety going on there. The more kind of world cinema approach, documentaries, 2D, 3D. There's lots of people developing them on their slates, and I'm really excited to see what's going to come out in the next 5 to 10 years. So I think we're in a good place, but I would also say that feature film needs particular attention in terms of encouraging development and putting the resources into developing them, because they are challenging to finance, and because they are take up so much time and resources to get out of the blocks.
Okay, thanks for that, Mo. I mean, in terms of what you said there, you were talking about 2006, which like is only 15 years ago, but it seems like ancient history now, doesn't it, in terms of the landscape? So I might just throw it over to you, Louise, there. In terms of the landscape, we chatted about the streamers and the SVODs, and like, how do you think they're affecting things? Because like they obviously didn't exist in 2006. So where do you think, or how do you think that affects the industry?
Yeah, I think it's changed the landscape quite a bit, I think, from how it was like 10, 12 years ago, even in the last 5 years, probably. I think like it's basically opened up a lot more opportunities potentially to make features and other content as well. And probably the kind of financing that wasn't always that accessible in Ireland, being based in Ireland. These are big companies that are looking for big budgets or looking for high standards, and it's a different there's a different format to how they're financing it, of course, and that's something it's fairly new still, and there's still a lot of figuring out to be done, but it is exciting because it's giving more opportunities, and it's sort of opening up the door to more possibly more avenues to making films, which is great. And I also think it's opening up the audience range as well. So the type of films that they're looking for is probably broader than it has been before, and that's also great. It gives us access to audiences, without thinking about the box office, without thinking about having to be in a cinema in order to reach a lot of people. This is something where it's like on a streaming platform, you can reach many, many, many more people, without the kind of onus of needing to market to the cinema and to be a big box office success and things like that. So yeah, I think it's interesting. Of course, there's challenges to it as well, but it's nice that there's this. It's good, I think, that there's this new option.
Yeah, and I know people talk about this being like a golden age for content, because the streamers are spending billions and billions. Now, I don't know if anyone wants to jump in here, but just in terms of the streamers, do you think there's a danger then that we might end up with only 5 or 6 customers then, that, because they become so powerful, that we actually end up with less options? I don't know, Carol, go ahead, Mo.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because I think, Louise is right that there's huge opportunity now, and obviously that should be the main headline of what we say. But there are challenges. I mean, if you look at the way the streamers are shaping the industry now. What's happening is they are working more and more with almost what you can call a layer of super producers. So what's happening underneath that is that there's a gap appearing with so many hundreds and thousands of smaller entities, really with little or no voice in there. And I would be concerned that that becomes a kind of a over influencing shape in terms of where we're all going. And I think the other thing is, you know, I think all of us have spent so much time, we'll have noticed, trying to find content. For instance, if you turn on your Netflix, as we do so much over the last year particularly, you know, you can spend ages actually trying to find what it is you want to watch. And I think that's something to do, that is the difference between, you know, what is out there in terms of the theatrical experience and how a film might be marketed and how it might be steered towards its audience and really defined and shaped for its audience, versus putting it out there for everyone, but people have to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I know sometimes they prompt things to you, but then you can spend an awful lot of time trying to find something that you want to watch. So there is a possibility your project could get lost, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they're prompting you too on an algorithm, and sometimes that can be rather under challenging.
Yeah,
for a while for audience and discerning audience, and audiences are very sophisticated. You know, they will want to be challenged, and they don't want to watch the same thing over and over again. So yeah, I think there's opportunity in both, but I wouldn't like to see, I guess, a situation, and I don't believe actually, I'm going to remain positive about theatrical, because I think people will always want to have that kind of collective experience in the dark cinema, and which is a more sensory experience as well for film goers.
Yeah. So bringing it back a little bit, like obviously we would, I suppose all of us would have ambitions at some stage to be a super producer. We're just bringing it back a little bit to somebody starting out, you know, and with ambitions to direct, or, you know, or produce their own feature film. How useful, I'm going to throw this to yourself, Carol, if that's okay. How useful are those short schemes like frameworks, do you think, in terms of getting somebody up to a level where they can actually produce their own feature?
Oh, amazing. Like amazing. Because I feel like for my experience, I didn't really work. I didn't work my way up through a studio. Because I graduated wanting to do stop motion, and there wasn't as many opportunities as back then. So to be able to apply and do frameworks, I got an opportunity to make something completely my own and show what I could do specifically. And then, you know, get that out in the world. And then that was the kind of experience that I got, as opposed to doing that in a bigger studio.
Yeah.
And then you've got experience then with the film board. You can go back then and with your next project, and there's a bit of trust there.
Yeah.
Develop something bigger.
What has your experience been at that, Alan? Have you any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think there's like another level to that there's also through making a film and traveling with the film maybe, or the process of distributing the film, that you sort of get entry into the market, into festivals, and there's a lot of networking that kind of comes out of that. So I think that there's a whole, like after the fact of making it and all that can be learned from that, there's this second part where it sort of brings you into the wider, especially like the European market maybe for European filmmakers. So yeah, it gives entry to that, and I think there's a lot to be learned from other filmmakers, and then you know, making contacts that can build towards co-productions later, and I think that's a whole side of that short film process.
And for somebody doing that, like if you're involved in making a short film, is that like feature film making in microcosm? Like, do the two things, can they be compared? I'm asking you that, Alan, just as a
well, on the time scale, it feels a bit like that. Making a short film with a very small team. I think that there is a lot, you know, parallels between approaching something for the first time, you know, on that scale. And I think, yeah, all the things you learn, I suppose it's, you're dealing with such a small amount of people that I think that the scale of the production side of it really isn't something that necessarily translates, I think, on an organization level with a small film or a short film, that you can really be a very small team. So I think that on that side, at the scaling up of it, there's a lot to be learned on that production and organization scale. I think that is I think another.
Cool. Mo, do you want to jump in there, Mo, or have you any thoughts on the frameworks type schemes or?
I think they're crucial, really. I think if you compare the landscape across Europe when we talk about short film, we see that there's a big difference, if you like, between a lot of countries in Europe's attitude towards short film and perhaps what still remained in going on here in animation for short film, because they prioritize short film, or if you like, they have short film more central to their tradition of filmmaking than is left, if you like, for us. And I think it's really important for everybody to hold on to it and to invest in it and to support it, because it is where people develop their talent and their skills. It is where people can make mistakes, which is important as well, and develop into a next film of some kind, or wherever they develop after that in their careers. But it's really a ground that needs to be walked and lived in. And I think frameworks is really important as part of that in Ireland.
And is there something specific we should be doing as a nation or a culture in terms of short films to nurture those? Or, you know, if someone is going to have a future in Irish feature filmmaking, is there something we should be doing, Mo, to encourage that, or is there just no place for them?
I think there's place for it, but
Yeah.
I guess first of all, I guess we should talk about the money side, but it is expensive to make a short film, and an animated short, like, it can be very costly. I do think that Frameworks is addressing that to an extent, but then we need the time and resources for people to have to put into it as well. And it can sap a lot of energy and resources out of a team if they're also trying to do work that's keeping the bread and butter of the company or the bread and butter of the group going as well. So maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe giving it more time might help, so that people can have a longer time to get there, because they might have the day job as well, might help. And also having places where I guess we can get to see it and access short film, you know, on a broadcast level would be very interesting too, so that people as viewers get an appetite for it, and get to understand it as a genre as well, because it's almost misunderstood, I think, at times. But yeah, it's very important that we think about that, and that we do give it some time, for teams, for producer, director, writer teams and others to develop.
Yeah,
sure.
well, like what you're talking about there, even is, you know, developing yourself and your skills as a director, as a producer, in terms of going back to that development thing. And I think it is very important, because there's often a criticism of Irish features that they arrive undercooked. Like, that's right across the board, animation, live action. So I just want to ask you, do you think enough development goes into projects, and where would you go to fund this? I'm going to throw this to Alan as well, because Alan, you said you might have something you could talk about residencies, particularly as you're on one at the moment.
Yeah, I think residencies provide maybe time and space, and also supports maybe slightly outside of the funding structures to help people in, especially maybe in the early stages. Some of the residencies
do you mind actually, Alan, telling us what a residency is, like, just for the uninitiated, myself included?
Yeah, sure. Okay, well, a residency, it would be when time and a space would be provided to an artist to develop their own project. And this could come with maybe sometimes it comes in the form of a grant, so you have some money to spend the time. A lot of the time it will provide you with a space somewhere to work, to focus on your project. And often they're also focused on a certain part of the process. So from my own experience, I took part in the open workshop, in the animation workshop in Denmark. And that, I suppose, following the name, was very open. You had a set amount of time, and you had somewhere to stay, and you had sort of access as well, because that was in a college. You had sort of access to the lecturers there, and a lot of people would visit through. So they had all of this industry connections as well, who would pass through. And at the moment now, I'm here in Annecy for the Annecy Festival residency, and that would be maybe more more structured and planned, kind of gearing around the festival and around MIFA where the market is. So in this case, there's mentoring throughout, and this is focused on the visual side specifically. So we would have mentors who work with us on the visual aspect, and then it gears towards certain parts of the festival where we'll have a pitch in MIFA now to pitch our projects to professionals. And so different residencies will have different focus, and I think that they're a good way to maybe put you also in. I think a lot of the time when people are developing projects, you're developing them in isolation to some degree.
Yeah.
And so one of the good things I found at residencies is that you're working with other professionals who are going through maybe the same thing, so that there is support and, I suppose, inspiration from that shared experience and shared enthusiasm generally. And so yeah, there's a whole range of benefits that come from them.
Yeah, no, but it is nice to get feedback as well, isn't it? As you say, like you're not sort of developing something in a bubble. You're getting feedback from your peers and from industry professionals, and the fact that you get to pitch it on the market is a big help, you know. In terms of yourself, Louise, like when you were developing a project, do they tend to be in-house, or do you develop them on your own, or what has your experience been of development?
Yeah, I've been in Cartoon Saloon now since 2013. So obviously it depends on where you are and what your situation is. Before that, I was developing in different ways, but since I've been in the studio, basically, like, we have internal development process. So at the moment, there's sort of like, you know, time and energy put aside for development of projects in-house. Just because, like, it is difficult to actually develop this. It's really difficult to get something off the ground if you can't commit energy to it. And it's hard to find that energy all the time in the evenings and the weekends. Now, it doesn't mean that, you know, you aren't, maybe initially you might be wanting to put that in, and like for short films and things like that, you know, it's quite natural to be maybe developing that on your own time to a certain extent before, you know, going ahead and pitching it in-house. But at the moment, developing a feature film, I'm working on it essentially like full-time now in-house, which is a great opportunity, because there's another advantage with that, which is that I'm sort of getting what Alan is talking a little bit about in terms of, like, I'm not in isolation. I'm getting to talk to other people, even if they're not working on the project with me. I'm getting to talk to other people about the project. And also I'm getting a kind of, you know, mentors are there. There's, you know, people who are experienced with their own films who I'm getting access to. But that's really helpful as well. So, and, you know, and obviously I'm getting the benefit of a lot of experience within the studio and a lot of people there. So it is for me, it's a great situation to be in. And I think it is hard to be able to get something to the level of, like, especially a feature film. It is that much bigger. It does take that much more energy. You have to, you know, especially stuff like the script and the story, they just need time and energy committed to them in order to get them up to the level to be able to be pitching them and stuff like that. And so I think, like, even if you can't do it full time, you still have to kind of be able to, like, a residency is a great way of being able to allocate that block of time towards it.
Yeah, but it's funny, like it all seems to need a structure, Louise. So, like, you've got the structure of that, you know, the internal process in your studio. Alan has the structure of the residency. Just throwing it out to yourself there, Carol, like you run your own studio. You're a smaller studio. Like, how do you deal with it? What's your process?
Yeah, I was have the benefit of making my own structure board. So, well, with the Lost Queen, when we first started developing it, we would just take time in between other projects and say, okay, we have a week or 2 weeks or however long we're going to dig in and just do a whole lot of concept art to, you know, get it down on paper, first submit to the film board for that initial development funding.
Yeah.
And Christina Yee is a screenwriter, so the two of us would have just, honestly, just really enjoyed working on it. So, I mean, it didn't really feel at the very beginning like that kind of time you had to put in before getting the development funding was like dessert to the dinner of our other work, really. So that's how we started. It was all kind of informal, you know, and we just talked to other studio members about it, just the other painters on the Bird in the Well, because that was when we first were thinking about doing that. Then we just got our package together and submitted to the film board, and we got that first round of development, which was great because it was just amazing then to have that chunk of money that we have time to really put into it then, just taking a good stretch of time. And we could travel just around Ireland looking at castles for our research. So
Yeah.
yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, yeah, especially if it was during lockdown.
Oh no, it wasn't during lockdown.
Yeah, yeah. I know, no, that is good. That is good. But just in terms of like, you know, in your sort of original bio and even in your award-winning film, like you use the word experimental, right? That's in there. I mean, when you're pitching stuff and you're looking for funding, do you find you have to sort of compromise a little bit on things? Do you have to pull back a little bit? I'm just curious about that, like sort of with my own sort of former producer hat on, you know?
Yeah, I actually feel like having made a short film that was experimental, it's a good touchstone to say, yes, that was an experimental technique. It was paint on glass, but it was still polished and it was still commercial. It was still like received that way. So
Yeah,
I can still say in whatever crafty stop motion techniques I want to use, I still want it to have that like commercial polish, that it's not, you know, overly rough and ready. It's not still slick.
And have you? And I'm just gonna stick with yourself, Carol, for a minute. But just in terms of that, then, did you find the fact that you'd won 50 awards, like, did that help you with your next gig?
Yeah, it helped more than I
Yeah.
realized it would, because that was
Yeah.
like the first short film I've made. So that was my first experience going to festivals. Like Alan said, like you just meet so many people, and it's
Yeah.
almost you're meeting the same people at different festivals, and it's like a little family grows. And even the people you don't realize are seeing your film when it's, you know, released in cinemas in like France or America, a lot of people see it. And so then we went to cartoon movie. People were familiar with it and they knew my name or whatever, and they're, you know, they're just more likely to reach out and be supportive of your next project. So
Yeah, oh, that's good. That's good. And what about yourself, Louise? Like, have you been able to channel your Oscar nomination, your Academy Award nomination into another feature, or like what
Yeah,
is
I
your
hope so.
experience?
Well, we'll see if
Yeah.
it works.
Yeah.
No, but no, it is really good. I mean, it's kind of it is. There's a whole life to a short film after, you know, you make it and there's a big, huge peak and you're climbing up the mountain the whole time. And then on the other side, you've actually got another peak afterwards. You can't quite see it until you're finished the film. And then you realize like, oh, there's a whole other peak. And the other peak is like, yeah, like, you know, going to festivals, and it's great, but it's also like a lot of work afterwards. But that also means that, like, you know, being able to go to LA, being able to go to festivals, getting a lot of response to the film when it was in festivals, that really did help to essentially, like, you know, it kind of puts you on the map a bit. You know, you're sort of a known entity after that.
Yeah.
And like, you know, it means that it does give people something to hang on to. So when you're talking about a project that you might have coming up, even if you can't say much about it, they have you can kind of refer to the film you have, or like as Carol was saying, you know, you could be saying like, okay, it's experimental, but it's this type of experiment. Like that's the kind of buttons we're hoping to push. So with my film, like it's been, you know, useful in that way. And, you know, it's definitely like a calling card that you can have. And it does help to give you a bit more recognition and get your foot in the door.
And how long do you think that lasts? You know, the way the Americans talk about having a bit of heat under you, you know, and you have to capitalize on that. Like, how long do you think that? How long do you get out of it? That sort of success.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on what you want. Like, I think if you want to, you know, there's a very hot moment when you're in LA and it feels like you're getting all sorts of meetings.
Yeah.
But if that's not what you're like, I'm not looking to go over there. If that's not what you're looking for, I think there's a longer but smaller tail of success to it in terms of like, you know, having longer. It's the beginning of conversations that then carry on. So even though my film isn't, you know, it's not the thing that people are talking about now, it's still something that, like, the conversations I began at that point that I got into the room, that I was able to talk to these people, that helps now. Like, I'm still continuing some of those relationships now, and that is useful. But I don't know. The answer is really, I don't know. Maybe it's forgotten about already. Who knows?
Yeah. No, it is funny, isn't it? You're just not quite sure. And do you think, like, as a you know, when you make one show and that goes out there and it's out in the world, do you have to have it? You might jump in here, Mo. Like, do you have to have another project ready to go so that when somebody, you know, when people say like, "What's your next project?" You can't wait for 18 months. Or any thoughts on that, Mo? Because I know you've had a movie and a sequel, like.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's impossible really. I mean, ideally the answer to that is yes, but it's not a science, you know.
Mm.
We don't have crystal balls in
Mm.
development. Development needs time. And just to mention something about that, you know, from the kind of creative producing side,
Mm.
working with writers,
Mm.
I kind of feel sometimes that we don't spend enough time, for instance, in the very, very beginning with story outline and treatment and reworking. And it can be a difficult creative relationship to manage, because
Mm.
you don't, like, a strong producer has to hold back, actually,
Yeah.
in a way, from going to production, even though on another kind of more realistic side, just in terms of running a business, you're not going to get into the funding properly to run the show until you get to production, and that's really pulling you in another direction.
Mm.
But you kind of have to resist it as much as possible until you know that your screenplay is strong enough for
Mm.
your package, that you're ready to start pitching properly and financing properly and getting your financing partners in. But,
Yeah.
you know, we could talk for a long time on that side of it, but I just wanted to mention that how
Yeah.
important it is, I feel anyway, to keep working story in through the drafts as well, but
Yeah.
even earlier. And
Yeah.
sometimes the contracts and funding structures are not loaded that way.
Yeah.
They're loaded towards the draft. They're not putting all the money on the treatment. And actually, maybe that's where our time and attention should be focused, so that we get our stories right. But you asked me, yeah, ideally you have something cooking and developing so that it's ready.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't always pan out that way.
No.
Because you need, you know, the stars to collide creatively and financially as well, to get something ready for production.
Oh, it just now, this has just come to me as we're chatting here,
Yeah.
Mo. But you know, like your 2x2 series,
Hmm.
when you made the first film, did you have the second film in your head as well, or did that come afterwards?
This is an interesting one, actually,
Yeah.
because at the very beginning, the 2x2 idea and world that we were working on was devised and intended to be a TV series. And we worked on it for a long time. And for whatever reasons, when we were all working on the creative team, we kept being drawn back to a narrative that was much more suited to feature and much more suited to that 80 to 90 minutes that we knew our audience would enjoy. And eventually it was a case of just giving into it and said, okay, this is a feature film. Let's make a feature film. So we then revisited the series in between while we had the first feature in production. And again, the natural organic story that we wanted to tell next was going to be a feature film. We're now developing the series.
Okay.
But obviously
Yeah.
it has had to change and redevelop as we've gone along as well.
Yeah.
So I can't say that we set out deliberately on any journey there. It's just the way it happened.
Okay. And just picking up on that, Mo, I might throw this out to yourself, Carol, but like what Mo was saying there about, you know, developing a TV series, do you think it's worth cutting your teeth on a TV series? Like, I know we've talked about shorts and frameworks, but do you think it's worth cutting your teeth on a TV series before attempting a feature?
Well, I kind of felt I went straight from developing, or finished The Bird in the Well and straight to developing a feature. But I thought it's such a long process that it's like, you know, I'll start now and we'll be developing this, I'd say, for a while. So the experience will come in between. So I mean, everything is good experience, not specifically a TV series, but a TV series is a completely different beast in a way. It's like pitching it seems completely different compared to pitching a feature. Like a feature is like a giant short film, like it can still be like very much like an auteur kind of project, compared with like a series tends to be a bit more commercial. Like it's
well, it's funny because like we're obviously doing the awards tonight, and like that's live, and it's funny, like at 7 o'clock tonight, it's just going to happen regardless, you know. We haven't been, you know, whereas, you know, with a TV series it takes an amount of time, and then with a feature film it takes even longer. So there's sometimes it can be soul destroying as well. I know, like it's, as Mo says, you have to go through the process, you have to be true to the script, but just as you say, from the time you come up with the idea to actually getting it on screen, it can be very long, you know. Have you any experience, Alan, of a TV series or?
I've worked on them, but not well. I would have worked as an editor, storyboard animatic editor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like any experience, just working with a big team is great, and you see how the process works. But I wouldn't have gone through it in the same way, as far as development to the idea. I wouldn't have been involved in any of that stage.
Yeah.
I think
And I
this-
know Mo. Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead, Mo. Yeah.
just going to jump in there,
Yeah,
you know, because sometimes when people listening maybe to people talking about feature as well, I wouldn't like people to think that it's some dark, mysterious art, because it's not really.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
another form of telling a story and another structure. So it's all about the structure changing to engage an audience intensely over 90 minutes or whatever. That's a very different ask to reaching and engaging an audience for a shorter format.
Mm.
But you know, at the same time, there are things in there that we can learn and study and develop skills around to engage our audience for that longer format. It doesn't mean that it's some kind of as I say, mysterious dark art. It's
Okay.
just a different ask. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd agree. Like experience from writing or artists or producing or directing on any medium in animation is going to help.
Okay, well, I got a good question that's just come in here, which is it's quite interesting. It's in the context of what we were talking about there. So just excuse me while I read this out. This is to all the panel, and anyone can jump in on this. But with the new trend of super short content across all media and the reduction of attention span and audiences in general, do you see this as a threat to feature films?
Who wants to go?
Who wants to
first?
jump in on that
I
one?
would say that it's so different that, you know, it's like a kind of beautiful thing on its own, but I wouldn't
Yeah.
see how it, you know, it probably perhaps influence feature films, you know, in the language maybe eventually, you know, interplay between all these things. But
Mm.
I would think that they're so different that they're just lovely opposites, you know.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd say like the long format or the big format TV series now are kind of, that's where I can see there's like a kind of a weird competition now between feature films and limited TV series, because the TV series are coming up in their production value so much that, you know, they're almost like feature film quality. And there's an interesting kind of like you know, like what is there a particular preference at the moment for them? But I think people will always come back to the feature film experience because it's a certain type of story. It's one, you know, one sitting kind of story, and it is like, I think there is still something about going to the cinema, and that's still going to be something that I think people will find appealing, hopefully. Again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No, well, I
actually,
think too. Even go ahead, Mo. Yeah.
Actually, with the streamers as well, like what you're, Louise is right, like in terms of the television point. I just want to agree with that. But the what you're seeing there happening as well is that like there isn't even kind of the traditional ideas now of episode length and stuff that's happening on streamers. Like that's all changing. So you can have a story, the story length becomes the length of the episode.
Yeah.
So I think having a longer story over a longer period of time is never going to disappear. People want, if the story is engaging enough, and that's really the point. If a feature story engages audience emotionally, people will stick with it, and that's what's challenging about features.
Yeah, and yet, and in some ways, I think it's a help because, you know, when you look at, you know, you like I have every one of the streamers in my house, but it's a big commitment. If you're looking at a TV series, it's a big commitment, and you have to, you know, you have to give over like maybe 10 or 12 hours, whereas a feature can be, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I know, and this is, you know, with deference to yourself, Carol, I don't know if Keira Knightley has done it, but, you know, you look like, you know, Kate Winslet, and like they're now, they like in the past they would never have done TV, and now like so many big movie stars are doing TV now, you know, because it seems to be where you know, where the action is. But yet in terms of feature, like it's a much shorter duration, and it's a much easier commitment for people, you know. I mean, do you think there's anything in that, Mo? Is there just that you know, the fact that it's not as big a commitment in terms of your time? Like it's
Yeah.
nice to just give yourself that 2 hour block.
But it's a hugely, yeah, like it is a hugely competitive space, isn't it? For our time these days. You know, we spend roughly a third of it maybe asleep, you know, and we spend roughly, I mean, I'm talking about conventional averages here, roughly a third of it working, you know. So now we're talking about having a third of it for how are we going to spend our time? Well, some of it will be recreational, or it might be sport, or it might be whatever, socializing. So now how much time is left where we're going to watch a screen again? So it has to be compelling. Yeah, it competes for us. So I think that, and there's so much more content being made
Yeah.
There's a ridiculous amount of content being made. So that's a call on us filmmakers to concentrate on the quality of what we're making,
Yeah. No,
because we need to be in that competitive space where we're going to rise to the top.
yeah, no, there's a nice question here, Louise. I might throw this to you because again, it's in the context of that. They're sort of saying is that sort of short form content and I suppose the fact that we have less time, is that affecting storytelling and content, such as faster paced stories or sequences within a feature? Like, is that?
I think there's definitely an appetite for quite fast-paced action. I would almost say in animated features at the moment. You know, and I think, you know, things go through kind of fashions. You know, or things kind of, you know, I think Spider-Verse is a good example of something that was like really intense to watch, but very visually exciting. But I think things, you know, it comes in waves, and you know, things, you know, there's a lot of films that might start chasing that look, but then it'll probably come back to something in the middle. And I think what's interesting is, like, you know, how long is a feature film in animation? They typically be in like 90 minutes, but you see, if you actually look at a lot of the animated feature films now are well up onto 2 hours. So it is also interesting, like, you know, if it's live action, I don't know if that makes much of a difference in their production budgets, but I know in animation, doing an extra half an hour is a big amount. It's a huge amount of money more. So it's interesting, like even stuff like that can have an impact.
Oh, that's
you know.
true.
But I think there's it's hard to tell with that kind of stuff. It's hard to tell. I think there's fashions and trends, but I don't think it's necessarily a fundamental change to the medium.
Okay. Now we're tight on time. It's about 20 to 4 now. So I just have a couple of other things I want to ask you, just in terms of Irish features, Louise. Like how do we measure success? Like what makes an Irish movie successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit, for me, it's a bit personal opinions, I suppose, in that respect. For me, it's really about, like, can it reach a wider audience? Can people see it? Not just the people who are, you know, able to go to the you know, the one screening in a nice art house cinema one weekend, you know, of the year or whatever. So it's really about, for me, it's really about reach, because, you know, you put a lot of time and effort into these projects. You want them to be seen by the people that you're making them for. So for me, that's the biggest, you know, the most important thing. And the general reception, in terms of not just, I don't just mean the critical reception, but like the actual audience reception of, like, do people engage with it? That for me is the absolute core important part. And then, you know, afterwards, you know, it is nice to get recognition from your peers, and nice to get recognition from the wider world, but that's like a cherry on the top of the cake.
So is that like a distribution issue as opposed to a box office issue? It's just making sure the most amount of people have the possibility of seeing your film.
Yeah, I would say, so it's a combination of that, and then also, like, is the film capturing that audience? Are people excited to watch it? Is there, you know, is it generating interest naturally, like organically, you know, organically? And I think that's like the dream. You know, that'd be the dream success, would be to have that. That's how I feel about it anyway.
No, that's fair enough. And Alan, like, based, you know, you're there in your residency, like, what, in terms of your peers or yourself, like what would you guys consider something, like, how would you measure success, or how would you or your peers measure success in relation to an Irish film?
I think at this stage, you know, like in early development, success will be getting the film into production, getting the film made will be our first success that we will all be very happy to reach. I think beyond that I think, because, like, at the scale, there's like a huge difference in scale in, for example, like the success maybe of, like, you know, a big budget, like things that come from big studios in the States or the likes, compared to European film that has, like, such a small budget in comparison, that that the scale is very different. I think getting success.
I hear you. I hear you. In terms then of, like, we're running out of time now, so I just want to ask you guys, like, if Like, would you have any words of advice to someone embarking on a journey? Like you guys are, I know you've all had, you know, you've all worked on features, you're all working on a feature. Like, would you have any sort of words of advice for someone starting out? If you don't mind, Louise, I'll throw that to you first. Like,
Yeah, I'd probably say like you know, kind of like follow the story that you have that you want to tell. So a bit like what Mo was saying, like if you're writing a story, if you have a story in your head and you're like, is this a short film? And then after a while you realize like, no, it's a feature film, or like,
yeah.
oh, I was making a TV series, but it turns out it's a feature film. It's like, don't be afraid of just trying, don't be afraid of like pulling that thread. And you know, it's if that's where the story's going and that's what excites you, you know, go for it.
okay,
Just go for it. Yeah.
okay. Mo, do you mind if I throw the same question to you then?
Yeah, I mean, I think story, I'm always going to say story anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that you know, the rest of it is not easy either, but it's something that you can work on down the line. But the story has to be strong and compelling, and it has to engage your audience. And I think studying story, not just having the desire to tell a story or the desire around an idea is enough. I think it's very worthwhile spending time reading and studying lots around story structure and what works. I don't mean in a formulaic way. There's lots of ways to tell a story, but there's also some basic things around feature that just work, like in our 3-act structure. And I won't go into the weeds in that, but there's really good sources and good knowledge there to help you to structure and to work on character as well.
That's good, and still retaining the flexibility, as Louise says, that like if it's taking you in one direction, just go with the flow, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you'll know pretty easy that the kind of demands for a series is somewhat different. So I mean, if it's more like something you can tell in a shorter format and it's got, as we used to say, the legs for a series, then you know, you go with that as well. But yeah, a feature has a different kind of heart and soul to it, and if you feel that that's there, obviously you need to develop that, and always be conscious that you're, as you know, that you've got people in a room for whatever that is, we'll call it 90 minutes, that you know they should stay there for a reason, and you need to hold their attention to the end.
And Alan, have you any thoughts on that, any sort of parting thoughts?
I think it'd be very similar. It's really just that thing about the story and keeping it simple, I think, earlier on. Like trying to tell the story in as concise a way as possible before you start to expand and you know, go off and intend to sprawl in different directions. I think keeping an eye on what's important to it and trying to really get the backbone of the story working.
Cool. That's great. And Carol, before we finish, have you any inspirational thoughts?
Yeah, just pretty much what everyone else said, but as well as like it making sure it's a story you're really passionate about, because you're going to be working on it for a really long time. So you want to make sure you really want to tell this story, and it's important that you are the person telling that story. That it's.
I suppose it is worth saying, isn't it? You know, you could spend a couple of years in developing, you know, a couple of years financing it, and then a couple of years making it. Like these things can take 3, 4, 5 years. So you're right. You really need to love what you're doing and love your story, you know?
Yeah. And like Louise said, fashions can come and go as well. So, you know, making sure it is something you just are really, it's important to you, and you're not going to get bored of it in, we hope not, 10, 15 years time.
Also prepare yourself for the fact that you will need to collaborate on it and share it with others, and others will have input. You know, you need to be open to that and ready to work in teams. Fight for the stuff that you feel you need to fight for, but be opening to listening to what people are questioning and querying too, because that's often a sign that something needs attention.
Pick your battles, as they say, Mo, right? Yeah, exactly. Well, come here, that's been a really, really enjoyable discussion, lads. Very interesting, lots of little nuggets there, I think. Thanks to anyone who sent in a question, much appreciated. And I want to thank our panel, to Alan, to Mo, to Carol, and to Louise. Thanks very much. Anyone who's out there, I'd ask you to stay tuned for our next channel, Pushing the Boundaries of Animation, and that's at 4:30 with Leanne Preston. And don't forget the main event tonight, our award show presented by Baz Ashmawi from 7 o'clock tonight. It's going to be a good show. As I said, there's a great buzz here today in the city centre in Dublin. So stick with us. Hopefully we'll see you at 4:30. Thanks again for everybody for joining us, and thanks again for the panel. All the best.
Bye.